The studio lights dimmed and the sound of the crowd faded into a low hum as the theme music ended. The red and blue spotlights blinked across the stage, casting sharp shadows behind the two podiums standing in the center. It was a live debate, on national television streamed in real time to millions across America. Hashtags like hashtag Leavitt vs. Schiff and hashtag DC Face Off scrolled along the lower third of the screen. Tension filled the room. Everyone knew tonight wouldn't be a normal debate. Adam Schiff walked onto the stage first, smooth and confident. He adjusted his tie and smiled politely at the crowd. A few members of the audience clapped. Others stayed quiet. Schiff's name carried weight. He had been through countless political battles. He was expected to dominate tonight. Backstage, Karoline Leavitt waited behind a thick black curtain. Her hands rested calmly on a sleek folder, the corner of an envelope just visible inside. She wasn't fidgeting, she wasn't nervous. A staffer whispered 30 seconds. She nodded once, her eyes sharp and fixed on the stage. She wasn't here to play defense. She had something with hers, something she had received only a few hours ago. It was thin, unmarked, except for a faded seal. She hadn't told anyone, not even her team. It was better that way. Clean, quiet, controlled. The host, Sarah Mitchell, stepped forward with her trademark smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "welcome to our special broadcast. Tonight, we witness a live debate between two powerful voices in American politics. Please welcome Senator Adam Schiff and former White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." As Schiff waved to the audience, Karoline walked out from behind the curtain. Her deep blue suit was flawless. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable. Some in the audience cheered, some scoffed. She barely reacted. She took her place at the podium and gently placed her folder down. The camera zoomed in slightly. She didn't look at Schiff. She looked at the audience. Calm, silent, focused. Sarah Mitchell continued. Tonight's debate will cover 4 key topics: economic policy, misinformation, national security, and leadership trust. Mr. Schiff, the floor is yours. Schiff nodded and began. His voice was smooth, polished like a man who had delivered 100 opening arguments. He spoke of democracy under threat, of the need for strong moral leadership. He painted Trump's era as dangerous, chaotic, and irresponsible. He reminded viewers of January 6th, foreign interference, and controversial pardons. His words were powerful and practiced. Then, without missing a beat, smiled lightly and added, "Of course, there will always be conspiracy theories peddled by people like my opponent tonight." He gestured toward Leavitt with a relaxed wave. Wild ideas, loud slogans, but little understanding of how government actually works. Some of the audience laughed. Schiff chuckled to himself. Even Sarah Mitchell's mouth twitched. But Karoline didn't laugh. She stared at him, her jaw slightly tight, her fingertips resting on the edge of her folder. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't nod. She didn't smirk. Just silence. The laughter in the studio slowly faded. Somewhere in the production booth, a director whispered into a headset, "Stay on her. Zoom in. Hold it." Everyone watching could feel it. There was something coming. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. Karoline finally blinked. She turned her eyes to the camera. Still no smile. No reaction. And then, just barely, her fingers slipped the edge of the envelope out of the folder and pushed it a half-inch forward. The moment was subtle, but chilling. She looked calm. But beneath the surface, she was loaded, and she was ready to fire. ChatGPT said. The stage lights glowed faintly as Karoline Leavitt adjusted her mic. The room was still expectant. Her eyes drifted briefly across the audience, then locked on Adam Schiff. Her voice, when it came, was low, but firm like a courtroom opening statement, not a campaign rally. "Thank you, Sarah, and thank you. Senator Schiff," she began. "I appreciate your passion. It's hard to deliver that many rehearsed lines with a straight face." The audience chuckled lightly. Schiff tilted his head, slightly annoyed. But Karoline wasn't interested in a laugh. She continued, measured and direct. You spoke of democracy, of truth, of dangerous conspiracies. But I want to ask a simple question, she said, lifting a printed sheet from her folder. Why is it that a man so concerned with foreign influence quietly signed a classified committee waiver in 2019 that allowed a private firm to partner with U.S. intelligence without public oversight? She paused. Schiff stiffened. The audience rustled, some confused, some intrigued. Leavitt flipped the page and held it up. A redacted document with a blacked-out signature line and committee seal glinted under the studio lights. This document was obtained legally, Senator, she said, and it contains your approval, along with 3 others, to bypass Senate oversight for a defense project that ended up benefiting to donors directly tied to your re-election campaign. The room went silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Schiff leaned forward, his hands gripping the podium. You're quoting incomplete documents out of context, he said sharply. That initiative, Project Albatross, was a bipartisan cybersecurity program. You don't understand the details. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Oh, I understand the details. Enough to know that the program's lead contractor was later fined for violating export control laws. And enough to know the Senate Ethics Office never investigated. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. On social media, screenshots of the document were already being posted. Commentators were whispering to producers behind the scenes. The moderators glanced at each other. Schiff shifted uncomfortably. You're trying to turn a policy debate into a witch hunt. Karoline took a breath. No, Senator, you already did that. You just didn't expect someone younger and outside your network to look at the files you left behind? Adi. Laughter came from the conservative side of the audience. It was sharp, fast, and unexpected. Schiff didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He just stared at her, trying to assess if she had more. She did. Sarah Mitchell cut in, trying to bring order. Let's pivot to misinformation in modern politics, she said. Senator Schiff, you've long argued that disinformation is one of the greatest threats to democracy. Would you care to elaborate? Schiff took the opportunity. Absolutely, he said, trying to reclaim the narrative. Disinformation campaigns, both foreign and domestic, undermine trust. And those who amplify half-truths, especially from unverified sources, are doing a disservice to the country. He didn't say her name, but the glance said enough. Karoline nodded slightly as if she expected it. I agree, Senator, which is why I made sure this next document was verified by 2 independent legal analysts, including a former counsel from the Senate Intelligence Committee. The folder opened again. Another page emerged. This time, it wasn't redacted. It was an internal memo dated just a week before the 2020 elections, summarizing a closed-door meeting between Schiff's office, a media executive, and a third-party data analytics firm. Karoline read aloud. To ensure messaging consistency across all major platforms, it is advised that stories related to foreign digital actors targeting Biden or DNC leadership be limited in visibility by flagged content partnerships. Full committee consensus. Not required at this stage. The document was signed, not by Schiff, but by his chief of staff, who operated under his direct authority. Schiff tried to interrupt, but Karoline raised her voice for the first time. You silenced stories, Senator. You coordinated with private media to bury content that didn't fit your party's narrative. That's not democracy. It's curation. Gasps from the crowd. The host held up her hand. Let's allow the senator to respond. Schiff's face was pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. A few seconds passed in total silence. Then Karoline, softly, like a journalist closing her segment, added, Or would you prefer we continue with the emails about Ukraine? That was the moment it broke. The audience erupted, not just in noise, but in movement. Journalists reached for their phones. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Schiff stepped back slightly from his podium. The camera zoomed in on Karoline's face. She wasn't smiling. She was just getting started. The noise in the studio hadn't fully settled when part 3 began. The lights dimmed again, this time to direct all focus toward the two figures at center stage. Karoline Leavitt stood still, hands folded calmly in front of her folder. Adam Schiff looked to the side briefly, lips pressed into a tight line, then leaned forward toward his mic with a slow inhale. His voice, when it returned, had dropped in pitch. "Miss Leavitt," he began, "you have taken what should be a thoughtful national conversation and twisted it into an ambush." Karoline didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. "You're waving around selective memos, half-context documents, and turning good governance into a sideshow," Schiff continued, finding his rhythm. "Do you understand how damaging this kind of performance is? Not just to me, but to the public's trust in government itself?" She finally raised her chin. "I think what damages trust," she said softly, "is hiding behind process when the public wants clarity." Another ripple ran through the audience. This was no longer a debate. 'Twas a chess match. And Schiff was realizing maybe too, late, that he'd underestimated her. Sarah Mitchell tried to reframe. "Let's move to the next segment, foreign policy and national security." But Schiff wasn't finished. He turned toward Karoline fully now, one hand braced on the podium. "You say you care about transparency, yet your entire argument tonight is built on innuendo. You haven't even explained where these documents came from. Why should anyone trust your sources?" Karoline's eyes flicked downward for just a second. Then she looked directly into the camera. "I'll tell you." The room fell quiet again. "These documents were provided by an anonymous staffer from the Senate Oversight Committee. Someone who worked under your leadership until they realized what was happening. Someone who saw emails go unlogged, meetings unrecorded, financial transfers between data firms and nonprofits buried under generic budget lines." She opened the folder slowly and pulled out a single envelope. "It was mailed to my office 2 weeks ago. No return address. Just a typed note inside. Start. Here, you're not wrong." She placed the envelope gently on the podium beside her. Schiff stood frozen, as if trying to calculate whether denial, deflection, or silence would serve him best. The moderator stepped in quickly. "Let's bring this back to policy. Miss Leavitt, what do you believe is the biggest foreign threat facing America today?" She didn't miss a beat. "Manipulation through information," she said. "And I'm not just talking about Russia or China. I'm talking about how domestic political leaders, people with committee power and media influence, have learned to do the same thing." Karoline looked directly at Schiff. "When leaders decide what the public should and shouldn't know, not because of national security, but because of optics, that's not protection, that's control." The studio was silent. Then Schiff finally responded, but this time, not with a defense. He adjusted his notes, cleared his throat, and said, "Let's not pretend that you're somehow above political theater." Karoline smiled just slightly. "I didn't come here for theater," she said. "I came with receipts." And just like that, she flipped one more page over. This time, it was a list, 6 names. All former staffers from Schiff's office, all of whom had either resigned or transferred out of Senate roles over the last 18 months. Beside each name, a brief quote, all pulled from internal HR memos, some highlighted, some redacted. The final quote read, "This is not oversight. This is image management. I can't be part of it anymore." Schiff's eyes darted toward the page. He recognized the line. He'd read that memo. And now millions of people were reading it. With him, Sarah Mitchell looked between them. "Senator Schiff, do you want to respond?" But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back from the mic slightly. Not a full retreat, but a shift. A hesitation. In debates like this, silence is louder than words. Karoline turned back toward the audience. This isn't about just one man. It's about whether we still have space in our system for truth to interrupt power. The crowd erupted first with uncertain murmurs, then full-throated applause from one half, while the other sat stunned. This wasn't the end, but it was the moment when the tide turned. The applause hadn't yet faded when the camera cut to Sarah Mitchell, who blinked once, twice, clearly recalibrating. Behind her polished expression was something new unease. This wasn't the debate she'd been prepared to moderate. It had moved beyond that. It was now history unfolding in real time on live television. "Let's move into national accountability," she said. "Leavitt, you've made serious allegations. Are you prepared to explain how these claims connect to broader issues of integrity in public office?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Yes, and I'll be brief." She picked up the document from the podium, not even glancing down. In 2021, she said, a contract was quietly renewed between the Data Initiative Group and the Oversight Subcommittee led by Senator Schiff. That contract allocated $8.6 million for data analysis and public information management. What's missing from the public record is that one of the subcontractors listed under that umbrella, Alight Strategies, was founded by a former campaign strategist of Schiff's. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Schiff's hand tensed on the edge of his podium. Karoline continued. Greenlight received $2.1 million of that budget. Their services: narrative tracking, message alignment testing, and social sentiment suppression. That's a pretty phrase for controlling how information spreads online. She let that land. Imagine this: a sitting senator using taxpayer funds to shape public dialogue in real time, to suppress dissent, coordinate media messaging, and test political language like a corporation launching a product. Schiff finally found his voice. "That's a gross distortion," he snapped. Greenlight was hired for digital risk assessment, related to foreign interference. And yet Karoline interjected. Not a single foreign actor appears in their 6 monthly invoices, only mentions of U.S. journalists, whistleblowers, and private citizens posting about COVID contracts. And border policy? The room went cold. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was cross-examination. A few members of the press panel leaned forward, scribbling notes, scrolling rapidly on tablets. Producers in the back were already cueing fact-checkers. The weight of the moment was unmistakable. Schiff straightened. "Are you accusing me of weaponizing my committee against the American people?" "I'm not accusing," Karoline said. "I'm showing." She held up the last page. This one had 2 columns. One side listed article headlines that trended for less than 24 hours in 2022. The other listed keywords from Greenlight's strategy testing logs. The overlap was nearly identical. "You don't have to silence the press," she said. "You just have to outpace them." A long beat passed before Schiff spoke again. But this time, his voice was lower, measured, as if he understood the tide had shifted, and his role was no longer attack, but survive. "Even if what you claim is true," he said, "what you're suggesting is dangerous. It feeds distrust. It dismantles institutions. We cannot build a functioning democracy on outrage." Karoline looked directly at him. "Then let's build it on truth." That line cracked something. Half the audience stood, clapping. The rest sat some in quiet disbelief, others shaking their heads. And then the host asked a question that hadn't been planned. "Senator Schiff," she said carefully, "do you deny authorizing those contracts?" He blinked, as if the question had caught him off guard. Then, slowly, "I authorized oversight data contracts. The specifics of subcontracting were handled by senior staff." "Do you deny knowledge of Greenlight's role?" He paused. "I was aware they were providing analysis support." Karoline stepped in. "So, to clarify, you did not know what kind of data was being tracked under your name." The silence was deafening. It was a trap, a legal one, because now, If Schiff denied it, he opened the door for his former staffers to contradict him. If he admitted it, he validated everything Karoline had claimed. He said nothing. The audience was dead quiet, the only sound being a distant shutter click from a press photographer. Karoline looked at the camera again. What you just witnessed isn't a victory for me. It's a moment of reckoning for everyone watching. Because if our leaders can't answer simple questions about the power they wield, then we have a bigger problem than politics. She stepped back from her podium. The debate wasn't over, but it didn't need to be. The damage had been done. For the first time in the broadcast, Adam Schiff's silence wasn't strategy, was surrender. The commercial break ended, but the studio hadn't cooled off. If anything, it simmered hotter. Cameras refocused. Microphones turned back up, and the audience, all demographics, all political leanings, sat forward in their seats, unsure if they were witnessing the end of a debate or the beginning of something far more explosive. Karoline Leavitt adjusted the mic on her lapel, her expression calm. But her fingers tapped against the podium like a clock ticking toward detonation. Across from her, Adam Schiff glanced at a notepad handed to him during the break. A staffer had scribbled something in haste. Twitter trending hashtag expose green light. He closed the pad. The moderator, Sarah Mitchell, smiled tightly. We return now to our program and our final 10 minutes. We'll move to audience-submitted rapid-fire questions. Each guest allowed 30 seconds to answer. First, Ms. Leavitt. What safeguards would you support to ensure no administration weaponizes tech surveillance against citizens? Karoline nodded. I'd start by ending proxy contracting. No more shell companies doing surveillance while Washington claims clean hands. If government wants access to your data, they need a warrant. Period. That's constitutional law, not interpretation. Applause broke out from the center of the audience. Sarah turned to Schiff. Senator. Schiff's response came slower. The First Amendment is not a shield for disinformation warfare. We must distinguish dissent from deception. Surveillance has to be selective and narrowly focused, guided by experts, not slogans. Karoline didn't speak, but she raised a brow just enough for the audience to see. Sarah continued. Next question, should sitting senators be held legally accountable for approving programs that later breach civil liberties, even if they didn't implement them directly? This time Schiff answered first. That's a legal maze, he said, his voice tight. We can't hold lawmakers accountable for intelligence programs they were briefed on but didn't directly control. If that standard were applied retroactively, no one in this chamber would be safe. Karoline's response hit sharper. Then maybe no one in that chamber should be safe, she said. If you're briefed on something unconstitutional and stay silent, you're not uninvolved. You're complicit. The room stirred again. Now Sarah leaned forward, her voice lowering as she glanced at a fresh card just handed to her. This next question is, Directms Leavitt. The documents you mentioned, have they been submitted to any federal investigative body? Or are you using them solely for public pressure? Karoline stepped forward again, her voice firmer now. They've been shared with the federal inspector general last night. Redacted versions will be made public this week. I don't play political theater. I play for accountability, Schiff broke in, unprompted. That's convenient timing, he snapped. You sit on information for months, then reveal it during a live debate with national optics. That's not bravery, it's manipulation. Karoline turned to him fully. No, Senator. What's manipulation is hiding behind closed-door intelligence. Briefings while American citizens are flagged for using the wrong hashtags. The room fell silent again. At the back of the set, producers whispered frantically into headsets. Viewership was spiking. Over 9 million people were watching the live stream, more than most presidential town halls. Social media was in overdrive. Hashtag Greenlight Files, hashtag Leavitt, vs Schiff, and hashtag Truth Over Power all trended at once. Sarah, trying to regain control, said, "Final question from the audience. A high school senior from Utah asks, "What advice would you give to young people who feel like truth and transparency are impossible in today's politics?" Karoline answered without pause. "Don't stop asking questions. Don't let anyone, me, him, or anyone with a title tell you the truth is inconvenient. The truth is loud. That's why they keep trying to shut it up." Then Schiff replied, "Quieter now. Be skeptical. Always. But don't confuse outrage with evidence. Democracy isn't built on accusations, it's built on law. Due process. Process matters. Or we all lose." Sarah stood. "That's all the time we have," she said. "Thank you to both guests for a debate that will be discussed for weeks to come." The studio lights began to dim. Music played faintly. The air in the room hadn't cleared. Karoline packed up her notes, slipping the flash drive into her jacket pocket. Schiff turned to one of his aides, whispering something urgent. As the credits rolled, Chiron flashed beneath the screen. Breaking. Inspector General's office confirms. Receipt of green light internal memo. Preliminary inquiry underway. Gasps came from the audience. The broadcast ended. But the story didn't. It had just been televised. The green room behind the stage buzzed with an energy that didn't match its silence. Phones rang. Staff whispered, but no one raised their voice. The air was too heavy, charged with the sense that something irreversible had begun. Karoline Leavitt sat in a leather chair, facing a muted screen replaying moments from the debate. Her line about truth being loud was already clipped and looped across social platforms. She didn't smile, just watched expression unreadable. Fingers steepled in front of her lips. Across the room, her communications director, Logan, walked in holding a phone. "Karoline, you need to see this." He handed her the screen. It was a short email, time-stamped, just 20 minutes after the broadcast ended. From the Office of the Inspector General. Subject: Acknowledgement of Submission Greenlight Memo Body. We have received the preliminary materials. Based on contents, an emergency panel has been assembled. Further contact will follow. Karoline didn't respond right away. Then, "How many people have seen this?" "Not more than 4. They're moving quietly." "Good," she said, standing. "Let them move, but don't let them bury it." In a separate wing of the building, Adam Schiff stood by a tall window. His face was lit by the glow of his phone. His chief of staff hovered nearby, trying to interpret his silence. "Senator," she said, "we've reviewed the memo. It references archived budget drafts from the 2018 Oversight Committee language you and Senator Graves signed off on. There's a link to a deleted clause about third-party surveillance testing." Schiff turned slowly. "Testing? Not anymore." The Greenlight Directive was activated in 2020 during the George Floyd protests. Facial heat maps. Drone audio sweeps. Most of it buried under pilot technology grants. He exhaled sharply. "And they're pinning this on me. It's a bipartisan signature line," she said. "Yours is just the most recognizable." Schiff stared at her. "Then there. Not just pinning it. It's already hung it." He moved toward a desk, picked up a landline, and dialed. "Get me Mallory at the DNC. Now." Back in the green room, Karoline paced. Her team had formed a protective semicircle, phones out, tracking live reactions. Reporters were circling. Producers wanted follow-up interviews. Logan asked quietly, "What exactly is the Greenlight memo's most damaging piece?" "Is it the activation clause? The name matched to Schiff's budget draft?" Karoline stopped. "No, it's what came after activation," she said. "The memo shows that Greenlight wasn't just for national security use. It was leased. Private contractors. Tech firms with loose ideas." She picked up her phone. "Going to say it on camera tonight." Logan looked hesitant. "There's risk. You call out companies like QuantaSync and ArchCore by name. They'll hit back. Lawyers, lobbyists. They'll come after you harder than Schiff ever could." She looked him dead in the eye. "Then we make sure we say it so clearly they can't erase it." At that same moment, across town in a glass-walled office, a man in a gray tailored suit watched two screens, one showing the post-debate coverage, the other showing a terminal full of internal messages from a server-tagged GC. He clicked open a message. Leavitt just confirmed public disclosure. Level 4 PR containment suggested. Contract review imminent. He typed a response. Delay statement. Run metadata sweep. Leak favorable context to PAC partners. Prepare NDAs for renewal. Then he minimized the window and turned to his assistant. Pull every archived feed from the debate, especially Karoline's segment. Let's see if she slipped. What if she didn't? The assistant asked. Then we shift to discredit, he said. No one survives a perfect truth knot if we make the world doubt the source. Meanwhile, as night fell over Washington, D.C., single phrase trended across global platforms. Hashtag Greenlight exposed. It was trending not just in political circles, but in technology forums, legal watchdog groups, even global privacy networks. Circulated showing Leavitt holding a spotlight, Schiff shielding his eyes. Public opinion had started shifting. One influential tech journalist tweeted, "If even half of what's in this memo is true, it's the biggest misuse of surveillance since Snowden." Karoline sat once more in the quiet of her green room, watching the flood of live analysis. Her team moved around her, now focused not on damage control but on defense. They were expecting blowback, threats, leaks, but they weren't backing down because the next step wasn't a debate. It was testimony. Outside the Capitol, gray clouds hung heavy over Washington, D.C. Reporters stood in packs. Their cameras aimed at the marble steps. Microphones were clipped, notepads ready. Everyone was waiting not for a celebrity, not for a president, but for Karoline Leavitt. Inside, the hearing room was packed. The House Oversight Subcommittee had called an emergency session following the leak of the Greenlight memo. What began as a debate between Karoline Leavitt and Adam Schiff had triggered something larger. An official investigation into covert information manipulation and potential abuse of surveillance funding by public officials. At the center of the room sat Karoline, flanked by her legal counsel and staff. Her face was calm, her hands folded. She'd testified before, but never like this. Never when the stakes were national integrity. Across from her sat members of Congress, some allies, some not. Adam Schiff was there too, seated one chair away from the subcommittee chair. His expression was neutral, yet tired. He had aged since the debate. The fire that once marked his tone was now dulled by hours of crisis meetings and attorney consultations. The chairperson, a no-nonsense independent from Arizona, struck the gavel. This hearing is called to order. We are here to discuss the revelations made public concerning the Greenlight memo and its implications on civil liberties, digital transparency, and federal misuse of power. All eyes turned to Karoline. She leaned into the mic. Thank you, Chairwoman Porter. I understand the gravity of what I've brought forward, and I do not take it lightly. A pause. I know that the Greenlight program was not just a policy experiment. Was an active instrument of narrative control. Under the cover of algorithmic testing and cybersecurity defense, Americans were being monitored, segmented, and quietly influenced. A congressman leaned forward. And you're saying this was funded directly by committee discretionary budgets? Yes. Subcommittee reports from 2020 show language inserted into budget amendments that redirected funds from tech infrastructure to third-party R&D. That money funded data aggregation tools that were then used to suppress and promote political messages. Someone coughed. Another shifted in their chair. Karoline continued. But it doesn't stop there. The memo confirms that classified machine learning models originally intended to detect foreign influence were adapted for domestic use. Political keywords, user sentiment, voting intention clusters. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ah, Democrat from New York interjected. Miss Leavitt, You realize these are explosive accusations. Are you stating that current sitting members of this committee knowingly approve such activities? Karoline turned slightly toward Adam Schiff. No, she said slowly. But some failed to stop it. And worse benefited from it. All eyes turned to Schiff. He adjusted his posture, cleared his throat. For the record, he began. I have never sanctioned nor participated in any domestic surveillance intended to manipulate the American public. Karoline didn't interrupt. She waited. But, Schiff added, if members of my staff were involved in side-channel agreements or unauthorized uses of data, I will be the first to demand accountability. He met Karoline's gaze, even if it cost me everything. That admission hung heavy in the air. Not quite a confession, but not a denial either. The chairwoman leaned forward. Then, perhaps, Mr. Schiff, you'll also submit the internal communication records requested by this committee. Schiff paused. Yes, he said quietly, I will. The session moved into closed review. Cameras were turned off, reporters were escorted out, but the nation already had enough. Karoline's testimony had ignited something deeper than scandal. It had forced the country to ask who controls the truth. And why does it take a confrontation not in court, but on live television for that truth to surface? Outside, as Karoline exited the Capitol, microphones rushed her. Miss Leavitt, are you afraid of political retaliation? She smiled faintly. If telling the truth is risky, she said, then we've all been living too safely. Another reporter shouted, do you think Adam Schiff will resign? She stopped walking. No, she replied. I think he'll finally understand that integrity isn't about power. It's about what you do when no one believes you, till everyone does. And with that, she stepped into the waiting car. Somewhere in the city, a new leak was being prepared. Because the green light memo wasn't the end, it was just the first file.